Welcome to HR Voices, a podcast where people leaders share their side of the story. We talk about the challenges they're facing, how they're addressing them, and what changes they hope to see as the workplace evolves. This podcast is sponsored by All Voices, the all-in-one employee relations platform. Hello, and welcome to HR Voices. I'm your host, Rebecca Taylor, and I'm here with Deane Ilukowicz, the Chief People Officer at TPI Composites. Welcome, Deane. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to have this conversation with you because I know we were just talking about, I know that, whenever you may be listening to this episode, we're actually recording this the day after the Super Bowl. So we were just talking about, lots of events that we've had kind of going on, in like the fun arena. So I'm excited to kind of dive into, this conversation here because I feel like the energy is really good. So
Great.
Can we start with a broad kind of opening question? Can you tell us about your role and can you tell us about TPI Composites?
Sure. My name is Deane Ilukowicz, as she said, and I'm the Chief People Officer here at TPI Composites. TPI Composites is the largest industrial manufacturer of wind turbine blades in the world. So we are headquartered here in Scottsdale, Arizona, which, as we were talking about, is, I'm sorry, very sunny and warm right now compared to other parts of the United States and the world. And we did just host the Waste Management Open and have in the past hosted the Super Bowl. But TPI was founded in the late 60s. And we have currently operations in the US, Mexico, India, and have had operations in Turkey, China, and other locations. And in addition to that, we host a number of associates in the EU. One of the unique things about TPI and where I felt really strongly about making time for this today is since I joined TPI 10 years ago, the story was very much about growth. And more recently, in 2025, TPI did file Chapter 11 bankruptcy. So having the wherewithal and the knowledge that you have going into that sort of process teaches you a lot more about what you don't know in these times and conditions. And I think that, some of your listeners might be interested in how you lead in more challenging times than in times where everything is kind of just compounding on the growth side.
Yeah, I would love to talk about that. And thank you for offering that information because I think that there's been a general theme of, just it being a tough time to be in HR. Just there's a lot going on. There's a lot to balance. So can you talk a little bit about more, leading through challenges and what are some things that either frameworks you've leaned on or philosophies? Like what's your secret?
My secret sauce. Yeah,
Your
I
secret to
think it's a
success.
little different with the HR sponsorship area. So from an HR sponsorship area, you really need to recognize that there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty in the business right now, but there's also uncertainty in every direction that you're looking, whether it's economic uncertainty or political unrest or whichever direction you're hearing, you're getting bombarded with information at the speed of light these days. And it's really hard to navigate and kind of calm your brain and focus on one thing at a time. And when you are in Chapter 11 process, I think the organization looks to the HR organization as if we know more than anybody else about what's going on. And yes, there's times when, as the Chief People Officer, I do have information that I may or may not be able to share. But at the end of the day, I do think there's some strategies in it as an HR professional, Rebecca, that you can lean on. And I have a couple of bullet points that I'd want to put exclamation points on for your HR community.
Yeah, I'd
And
love that.
the first one is probably transparency and giving context around transparency. I think it's really important as an HR person to be able to say the words, I really don't know. But when I do know, and if I learn something, I'm happy to share that with you. When you go through these processes, there's honestly more that you don't know than what you do know. And sometimes the information that you know needs to be publicly disclosed, right, before you can share it internally. But I do think that the broader organization tends to look to HR as, you know what's going on. And having the wherewithal as an HR professional, I'd rather my team and myself say, hey, look, I really don't know. But when I do know, I'll share what I can with you because I think that builds trust
Yeah.
in an organization.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say as an HR leader is you really need to advocate for your HR team because they carry a lot of weight during these events. For anyone out there who's done site closures or redundancies or, exiting markets or divestitures, there's a lot of weight that the HR organization carries on their shoulders around impact to people. And that is not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing to be involved in the conversations. It's not an easy thing to coach leaders on how to have the conversations. I've worked in markets where you got sent to HR's office. That's not the way I let things
Yeah.
happen here, right? The leader and an HR professional sit down with the individual to understand and have that dialogue thoughtfully around impact. So, but as an HR leader, advocating for your team and giving them the space to navigate those emotions, I think is really
Yeah.
important. I've got two more and then stop me.
No, go for
One
it.
of the one of the other ones is resiliency, right? I will tell you, I've been talking about resiliency for a couple of years now. And while I wave my resiliency flag from a cultural perspective, you need a lot of grit and you need a lot of organizational resiliency to manage through these times and processes. And you need to be able to adapt and you need to understand that what's right today is wrong tomorrow. And the path that you think you're on today might be different tomorrow. And that's okay because at the end of the day, you're driving towards what's best for the business, for the associates, for the shareholders. And you have so many interested parties and stakeholders. You're trying to
Yeah.
thread that needle on what works best for everyone. But developing the resiliency to bounce back from days that are more hard, right? Harder than others, I
Yeah.
think is critically important.
Yeah.
And then you hear a lot too, Rebecca, I would say, about psychological safety. And psychological safety is something that comes up and people go, oh, psychological safety. It matters, right? You need to give your team safe space. You need to give them space to come into your office, call you on Teams, call you on the phone, take a walk, have a coffee. They need space to emote with you as a trusted leader in the organization because a lot of times the HR team doesn't have right, that outlet. Like, where do HR people go to complain, right? There's not a complaint department for the HR
Yeah.
organization. Not that we're a bunch of complainers because we're not, but you
There's
talked about,
feedback though.
sometimes being in HR can be pretty lonely.
Yeah.
You know what's coming, you know what people are being impacted when you walk through the hallway, and HR organizations need to rely on their trusted leaders that they can confide in. They need to rely on each other across regions and geos where they can have that network of resources. So I just think, at the end of the day, what's best for the business is a grounded HR organization that's able to support the business needs and the outcome. And again, I just can't reinforce enough that establishing that trust and credibility with the business during these times of uncertainty really matters.
Yeah. I love that you're saying this, especially the element of psychological safety, because when you were first talking about resilience, you always hear people talking about resilience, and sometimes it's framed as powering through everything all the time, no matter what. And I think a really important kind of way that you can build resilience in his organization is when it's balanced because it has psychological safety. So resilience doesn't necessarily mean you just keep going and nothing stops you. It means that you can also sort of take a pause and say, okay, that didn't work. We need to readjust. We need to shift. Let's take a step back, or let's just slow down for a second and let's readjust and figure out how we need to address whatever it is that we weren't expecting that now needs a different approach. And you can only do that if it's safe enough for someone to say what we're doing now isn't working. And I love that kind of balance that you kind of brought to that as a recommendation. When you talk about building trust, I want to kind of dig into that because this is sort of a theme that I love to talk about. At All Voices, we really kind of believe that everyone should be able to have a voice in their organization. Everyone should be able to give feedback. And it doesn't necessarily mean not all feedback is complaining, right? Sometimes it's feedback that's just like, hey, I feel psychologically safe enough to say that this thing could maybe be a little bit better. And I want to kind of see how we could make this better. So how do you have specific strategies or approaches, for building trust within your organization, not even just as HR, just also as Deanie, like as a human?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point, and I think there's a couple of thoughts I have just off the top of my head around that. I mean, a lot of it is being truthful, right? I think trust comes from truth, right? And I think at the end of the day, saying what you know when you know it in the most thoughtful and an engaging way possible, helps develop your brand or your reputation, right, as a trusting person. I think the more truthful and audible interactions you have with people, right, the better the outcome is. Even if the message isn't so positive, I think people
Yeah.
really just want to know what's going on and how it might impact them. Years ago, I can think about a leader that I worked with in manufacturing, and they called him the Pip King. He was always the
Oh
one who
God.
was handing out improvement plans, but he also had the highest engagement. And what
Mm,
was really interesting about that, because this is 15 years ago, right, when some of these correlations weren't as commonplace, right, in HR communities,
right.
was The reason he had highest engagement is because he had the most honest conversations with his people,
Yeah.
and they knew where they stood, they knew what their expectations were, they knew where they were doing a good job, they knew where he expected them to improve. So again,
Yeah.
I think just being honest, being transparent, yes, you want to advocate for your people, that's fine. But at the end of the day, if you get to a point where you don't think something's salvageable, frankly, the most graceful thing is to have that hard conversation. And that's where I see leaders trip up more so than not, because they don't want to do that. They don't want to hurt someone's feelings. They don't
Yeah.
want to impact families. And I hey, look, I get all that too. And
Yeah.
I'm painfully empathetic when it comes to those things. But at the end of the day, sometimes just rip the band-aid off and have
Yeah.
that dialogue. The organization and the person are going to be better for it, because then they can smoothly transition on to the next.
Yeah, yeah. I think a really important factor of that is the fact that you've had experience with someone who's used PIPs successfully, right? Because they do have sort of a correlation now where it's like if someone gets a PIP, that usually means it's a formality until they get fired. And, in some cases it is. In some cases it's when they're not used properly and you have, managers that aren't trained well and that's kind of how they're using it. And all of a sudden, HR never hears about anyone. And then the manager comes in and they say, this person needs to go. And you're like, well, where's the documentation? Like,
That's right.
where are the conversations? So if you have a leader that's used that documentation successfully and has actually seen people, overcome PIPs because expectations were clear and they had the support to kind of get to that next step, that's like chef's kiss. That manager needs to
Mhm.
be preserved, right?
I agree.
And so I think like the performance conversations are sometimes some of the hardest conversations to have too, because this isn't me doing a ton of research. It's just me speaking from my years of experience doing this. People tie so much of their identity in work, right? So when you're giving someone feedback on their performance, sometimes they take it as feedback on their personality, or because sometimes the feedback is also skewed towards their personality, which is probably a whole other rat hole of a conversation we can go into. But I think there's like, with the way that tools are built now, or the way that we can kind of think about how we manage performance, I do think that there is sort of a chance to kind of have more performance feedback that's based on things that you do so that you can kind of get the feedback on how to do those things better and make it less about personality and therefore make it more productive. But that's my theory. That's my hope for
I
the world.
agree. And I will tell you that many years ago, I heard Craig Wortman speak. He was from Kellogg out of Chicago at the time. And one of the things he said is you can give feedback all the time, right? And feedback's a gift, right? We hear that term all, and maybe it
Right.
doesn't feel like a gift at the time. But, to break that down very simply, what we try to do here is anytime you have something happen, whether it's a presentation or a conversation or a call, rather than waiting for these milestone markers of performance, which frankly are archaic and probably you're going to start seeing more and more organizations move away from some of these cycles, because people need feedback more often than twice a year.
Hmm.
Break it down very simply. What's one thing, Rebecca, you thought really went well from this podcast? Awesome. Great. Agree. Here's one thing I thought really went well, right? And then hey, Rebecca, what's one thing you can improve? And then Deanie,
Hmm.
what's one thing you would do different, right? Now, if all those things match up magically, then the conversation's pretty simple. But when there's mismatches around, ooh, you thought it went
Yep.
well and I thought maybe it can be improved, or you thought this didn't need to be different, or I maybe thought it did, that opens up the dialogue for a very rich conversation based on a very simple two questions, right?
Prompt.
So I don't think it needs to be as over orchestrated as a lot of organizations take it to.
Yeah.
But you can give feedback very simply and have it be wonderfully effective.
Yeah, I agree. And it's baking it into sort of micro habits and behaviors that you can have, like you said, just sort of talking about performance and how it shows up in a work effort that you did, whatever that might look like. So if you're in a sales call, let's give feedback to how someone handled an objection. See how do you think you can get that call to be better? What are things that you wish you said that you didn't? And then taking the next call and implementing that feedback and then making the next thing just a little bit better. I think when you have performance cycles where you're only getting feedback once every 6 months or once a year, it turns everything into, I have to change all of these habits and behaviors in one huge grand amount of time. But that's not how life is. That's not actually how you show up day to day. Like if I get a review tomorrow that there's all the things I have to improve, I'm not going to show up today suddenly improved in those areas, right? Like you have to kind of do it, practice it, and have the space and frankly the psychological safety to mess it up and to keep on improving it and have that sort of dialogue that's there. I really like that
And then if
example of
you've
just
ever
we can
done
keep it
that
simple.
kind of review and then your associate looks at you and is like, why are you just telling me this now? Because I could have
Yeah.
changed that 6 months ago and now we're 6 months further behind and I've got this brand now. So we owe it to people as leaders to give them more time.
Yeah, yeah. And it's baking performance improvement into conversations, but not making it feel like I'm serving you this detention
That's
survey.
right.
It's just like, here's where we can have a little bit of performance improvement. Let's measure that. Let's go. It doesn't have to be this whole thing. And if those workflows can be managed in a way where they don't feel as intimidating, and you can actually look back and see, hey, in the last month or two, I have seen measurable improvement here, then that's exciting for people to see. It's motivating and it drives resilience too, because people can look back and see that they've had wins. And that's another benefit of continuous performance management. It's not just continuous correction, it's continuous wins that people can say, oh, this is something good that I did. I'm going to use that to keep doing good things.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I'm curious about, you've got a lot going on. It sounds like I'm sure many, many things that kind of are happening all at the same time. Is there a project that you're working on right now that you're excited about or an initiative that's kind of getting you excited that you're working with your people on?
Yeah, I think, I thought about this question ahead of time, and I don't know that it's new, but I think it's coming back to center on presence, right?
Mm,
Presence, empathy, and grace are the three words that I thought about when I was thinking about this. Presence means something very different today than it might have 10 years ago, right? I mean, even 10 years ago, when you're on conference calls and you're one on the call and not in the room, it felt
yeah.
odd, right? And then
Yeah.
COVID happened, right? And the world overnight somehow magically figured out how to communicate through a myriad of platforms, right? We use Teams at TPI, and they turned it on just like that.
Yeah.
Now, I will tell you that living through that was hard, but talk about building resiliency and muscle when it comes to how to
Yeah.
navigate something unplanned, right? A
Yeah.
worldwide pandemic is not really on your agenda for a Wednesday.
Hopefully you only do it once too.
Yeah, well, H1N1, not quite the same as COVID, but still, they're
Yeah.
gonna all these things come in cycles. But that said, being present to me means being present in the conversation, right? I am the worst when it comes to multitasking. I feel like I can do 10 things at once, and I'm maybe doing three of them pretty well,
Yeah.
maybe five okay, but the other ones are
Yeah.
probably like, yeah, not getting the attention that they really need in the moment. So
Yeah.
I've been trying really hard to practice presence. And I've been trying to encourage my team to practice presence because when you have due diligence requests and business, partners that need you and associates that are concerned, and the world is just moving at a lightning speed around questions that need answers and issues that need addressed and benefit plans that need renewal and merit process that needs to, there's always these things. There's always a lot going on, but
Yeah.
really find your moment to focus and be present. And when you're present, the classic seek to understand, seek to listen, don't jump to the judgment, right? It's very easy to do when we're all really busy and we're moving fast. But take that moment to think about how would that make me feel? The wonderful story Blink, right? Take everything you know in life and blink and make a comment that's leaning towards the empathy gene first, right? Before you start judging people. And just be graceful, right? We talk a lot about policies in HR and compliance in HR and that stricter side of the discipline and the function. But hey, look, to me, there's guardrails on the road. Stay in the guardrail, right? You don't
Yeah.
have to be in the left lane or the right lane. Just don't go flying off the road and we'll probably be okay, right? You go
Yeah.
flying off the road and you don't tell me, and then I find out later, and then now I've got a bigger issue to solve, and you're
Yeah.
raising your hand in a panic, right? It's not helpful for anyone. But
Yeah.
focus on, right, stay in the road, use good judgment, let the policy be your guide. Yes, there's stronger policies here and there because they're legally required. I get all that, but we should not be so bound by the black and white because the world is just not like that. It hasn't been like that
Yes.
for many, 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 many years, let alone
Yes.
today, with all the different things that people are being pummeled with from a social perspective. So
Yeah.
I would say I'm trying to do it better. I'm trying to model that behavior for my teams. And I'm trying to impress upon our leaders just you need to be a little patient, right? People
Hmm.
aren't trying to drive you crazy. They're just going through what they're going through. And if you've got 10 of them, right, you're getting pummeled with 10
Yeah.
people and you're trying to be the one person that's keeping the finger in the dam and trying to keep the
Yeah.
business running. Because by the way, we're still producing product. We're still
Yeah.
running a business of almost 10,000 people. So I try to remind my business leaders and my HR team from time to time, hey, look, we still have 10,000 people working for this company. We still have
Yeah.
customers. We still have products. We still have commitments. All those things matter, But then you've got all this stuff over here that you need to be empathetic and you need to be patient and you need to
Yeah.
build resilience and you need to be adaptive and oh yeah, you need to get your
Yeah.
performance reviews done. And so again, it's
Yeah.
try to just take a deep breath, to calm your center and just be a little cognizant that the world is a tough place right now,
Yeah.
I think goes a long way.
Yeah. I think it's really, really good advice is just kind of be more present and try to focus on the things that maybe the things that you can control or just listen to people and just sort of acknowledge like, hey, this is an important thing that you're feeling or this is an important factor of your experience in your life that is, showing up here and that's okay too. Here's some perspective. Here's, where we can support. Here's where you might, here's just ways that you can just kind of listen to each other a little bit better. I love that as sort of presence and grace and patience. That was the other word that you said that's really resonating because it has been it has been a culture of let's move really, really fast a lot for in a lot of businesses. I come mostly from startups, but I've worked in public companies too. And for years it's been, fast, 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 grow, 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 go crazy. But I think like now, it is sort of a good time to sort of say, okay, where have we had a lot of action and not a lot of thinking and a lot of learning? And let's kind of take that as a spot to maybe register or regulate our inputs a little bit better to find the real themes, patterns, and trends that we need to act on and address on from a culture perspective within our organizations versus the noise that, might be coming in. And maybe noise does have patterns, but maybe the pattern isn't what everyone thinks it is, right? Maybe it's something else that you need to figure out.
Agreed.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you. Do you have any closing thoughts as we wrap up the rest of this conversation?
I didn't start in human resources, Rebecca. I started in operations. And, I think that's helped me grow from a business perspective. And again, advice is advice. But I think for any HR person at any level in the organization, you need to focus on being a good business person first and a strong HR strategist and practitioner second. Because if you don't understand the business and how it runs and how it makes money and where it's winning and where it's challenged and all those related business discussions that you want to be at that table for. People talk about HR being at the table. Once you earn that spot, you want to keep that spot, but you need to understand the business at its most foundational level in order to be the very best HR practitioner, strategist, partner that you can be. So seek to immerse yourself in those dialogues where you can. It's just going to make you be a stronger HR professional. And I had no intention to be in HR when I started. I was going to be a plant manager and a GM and an ops officer and all that stuff. And I'm very glad I fell into this profession somewhat by accident. It's been rewarding, it's been challenging. It's a function that's going to continue to grow and add strategic value in the future. And I'm just very excited for all your listeners who are hoping to or currently in human resources.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Absolute mic drop there because you're right. Learn the business and then that's going to help you to kind of have the influence to know even what are the best things that need to be done from an HR perspective too. It's like you got to know what the goal is to kind of get there. So
For
thank you.
sure.
And thank
I've
you
enjoyed the
everybody for
dialogue.
listening.
Thank you.
Yeah, this was really fun. Thank you, Deanie. And thank you everybody for listening. And I hope everybody has a good rest of your day. Bye.
Yeah, enjoy your day. Thank you.